My fiancé texted, "I'm calling off the wedding. It's over." I replied, "Understood." Then I showed her family the secret folder on her laptop. Suddenly, she is desperate to reconcile. I, 29M, was sitting in my office when my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. The message was cold, clinical even. She was calling off our wedding and ending our 3-year relationship. Just like that. No explanation, no discussion, just a digital execution of what I thought was the love of my life. My hands didn't shake as I typed back a single word, "Understood." But inside, something had already shifted. The hurt was there, sure, but underneath it was something else entirely. Something that had been building for months as I'd noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. We'd been planning our wedding for 8 months. The venue was booked, invitations sent, and her family had already flown in from across the country. Her parents had even extended their stay to spend more time with their future son-in-law, me. They were staying at our shared apartment while I'd moved temporarily to my buddy's couch to give them space. The irony wasn't lost on me now. 3 days earlier, she'd asked me to fix her laptop because it was running slowly. She'd been complaining about it for weeks, and since I work in IT, it was natural for her to ask. I'd taken it to my office to run some diagnostics and clean up the storage. That's when I found the folder. It was buried deep in her documents, hidden behind layers of subdirectories with innocuous names. The folder itself was titled Backup Files, generic enough to avoid suspicion. But when I opened it, my world tilted. Screenshots, hundreds of them, dating back almost 6 months. The first few seemed harmless, conversations with someone whose contact name was just D. But as I scrolled through chronologically, the messages evolved from friendly to flirtatious to explicit. My fiancée, the woman who'd been planning our future together, had been having an emotional and physical affair for months. The screenshots weren't just random captures. They were methodical, organized by date, as if she was documenting something. Some included her responses, others were just his messages to her. The pattern became clear as I read through them. She was keeping evidence, but for what purpose, I couldn't understand. The content ranged from sweet good morning texts to detailed descriptions of their physical encounters. There were photos too, not just intimate pictures, but screenshots of hotel confirmations, restaurant reservations, even screenshots of lies she'd told me about her whereabouts. She'd saved a screenshot of a text she'd sent me claiming she was working late, right next to a photo of her and this man at some upscale bar across town. But the most damning evidence was in the recent screenshots. Plans to end our relationship, discussions about timing it right after her family arrived so she could have support during the transition. She'd been planning this breakup like a military operation, and the man in the screenshots had been coaching her through it. The final screenshot was from 2 days ago, a message from him telling her that his divorce papers were finalized and they could start their life together properly now. Her response was a photo of her engagement ring with the caption, "Soon this will be gone." I'd sat in my office chair staring at that screen for what felt like hours. The methodical nature of her deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated dismantling of our relationship while she kept me as a safety net. But I didn't confront her. Instead, I copied everything to a secure drive and fixed her laptop like nothing had happened. I even optimized it better than she'd asked for. When I returned it, she'd been so grateful, kissing my cheek and telling me I was the best fiancé ever. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Now, 3 days later, her breakup text felt like the final act of a play I'd been watching from the wings. I looked at my phone again. "I'm calling off the wedding. It's over." The audacity was impressive. She was breaking up with me via text while her parents were literally sleeping in our apartment, probably wondering why their daughter had suddenly decided to destroy what seemed like a perfect relationship. My initial plan had been simple: wait for her to confess, have an adult conversation, maybe try to work through it. But the text message approach told me everything I needed to know about her character. After 3 years together, I deserved better than a digital dismissal. Her family liked me, really liked me. Her father had already started talking about business opportunities we could explore together. Her mother had begun referring to me as her son and had spent the last week cooking my favorite meals. Her younger sister had asked me to walk her down the aisle at her own wedding next year since their father had mobility issues. They deserved to know who they were supporting. I drove to the apartment that evening. Her car wasn't there, but her family's rental was parked outside. I used my key. Technically, I still lived there for another few days until I could find a new place. Her parents were in the living room watching television. They looked up when I entered, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. They knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. Her mother asked if everything was okay, and I told them we needed to talk. I sat down across from them and explained that their daughter had ended our relationship via text that morning. The shock on their faces was genuine. They clearly had no idea this was coming. Her father started to say something about young people and communication problems, probably ready to play mediator, but I stopped him. I told them there was more they needed to know before they started planning damage control. I'd brought her laptop with me. I opened it and navigated to the folder. I didn't show them everything. Some things were too explicit and would have been cruel to share with her parents. But I showed them enough. The timeline of the affair, the screenshots of her lies, the planning of our breakup, and most importantly, the calculated way she'd orchestrated everything to happen while they were visiting for support. The silence in the room was deafening. Her mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, anger, and finally, a deep sadness. Her father's reaction was more controlled, but somehow more intense. I watched him process the information with the methodical approach of someone who'd spent decades in business dealing with people who weren't what they seemed. He asked if I was sure this was real, and I showed him the metadata on the files, the timestamps, even pulled up some of the locations on Google Maps to show they corresponded with times she'd told me she was elsewhere. I'd done my homework. Her mother started crying. Not just tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. She kept saying she didn't understand how they'd raised someone who could be so cruel and calculated. Her father put his arm around his wife and asked me what I planned to do next. I told them I was moving out completely over the weekend and that I'd already canceled everything I was responsible for regarding the wedding. I explained that I wasn't looking for revenge or trying to hurt their daughter, but that they deserved to know the truth about what kind of person they were supporting through this difficult time. Her sister arrived about an hour later. She'd been out exploring the city and came home to find her parents in crisis and me sitting there with a laptop full of evidence. When they filled her in, her reaction was the most volatile. She'd looked up to her older sister her entire life, and seeing the evidence of such calculated betrayal shattered something in her worldview. She asked if I was going to show this to everyone, make it public, ruin her sister's reputation. I told her I had no intention of broadcasting this beyond the family. This was their business now, not mine. I just wanted them to have the full picture before they started offering unconditional support to someone who might not deserve it. We talked for another hour. They asked about the man in the screenshots, and I told them what I knew. He was a divorced colleague from her marketing firm, recently finalized his own divorce, apparently had been pushing her to leave me for months. Her father asked if I thought this was her first affair, and honestly, I told him I didn't know. But the sophistication of her deception suggested this might not be her first rodeo at leading a double life. By the time I left that night, the family dynamic had completely shifted. They weren't angry at me. If anything, they seemed grateful that I'd shown them the truth instead of letting them stumble around in ignorance, trying to fix a relationship that had been sabotaged from the inside. Update 1. The next morning, my phone started buzzing early. She was calling repeatedly, but I didn't answer. The voicemail started around 7 a.m., and I could hear the panic in her voice even though I wasn't listening to the full messages. By noon, the calls had escalated to frantic. She was clearly back at the apartment and had talked to her family. The tone of her messages had shifted from confused to desperate to angry and back to desperate. Around 2 p.m., I got a text asking me to please call her, that there had been a misunderstanding, that her family was upset about things taken out of context. The gaslighting attempt was almost impressive. I finally responded with a single text. There's no misunderstanding. Your family saw the same evidence I did. The screenshots speak for themselves. She called immediately. This time I answered. She was crying, but it sounded performative rather than genuine. She tried to explain that the screenshots didn't show the full picture, that it wasn't what it looked like, that she'd been confused and this other man had manipulated her. She begged me to meet with her so she could explain everything properly. I asked her a simple question. If she wanted to work things out, why had she broken up with me via text instead of talking to me about her doubts and concerns? Why had she made plans with another man to start their life together after getting rid of me? The line went quiet for a long moment. Then she started crying again, but this time it sounded real. She admitted she'd handled everything wrong, that she'd been scared and confused, that she'd made terrible decisions, but still loved me. I told her that if she'd come to me 6 months ago and told me she was having doubts, if she'd been honest about her feelings, or even about meeting someone else, we could have worked through it like adults. But the level of deception, the calculated planning, the fact that she'd kept me as a backup plan while actively planning her exit, that wasn't confusion, that was cruelty. She begged me to meet with her that evening. Against my better judgment, I agreed, but I told her it wouldn't change anything. I just wanted closure. We met at a coffee shop near our apartment. She looked terrible, red eyes, no makeup, wearing sweatpants and one of my hoodies. She'd clearly been crying for hours. She tried every approach she could think of. First, she minimized the affair, claiming it was mostly emotional and had only been physical a few times. Then she tried to blame the other man, saying he'd pursued her aggressively and she'd gotten caught up in the attention. When that didn't work, she shifted to blaming me, saying I'd been distant lately and she'd felt neglected. Finally, she just broke down completely. She admitted that she'd been living a double life for months and had convinced herself that she could manage both relationships until she figured out what she really wanted. She said the screenshots were her way of documenting things because she felt guilty and wanted to remember why she was making these choices, like evidence for a case she was building against our relationship in her own mind. The most telling moment came when she admitted that her plan had been to break up with me, spend some time with her family getting sympathy and support, then gradually introduce them to her new boyfriend over the next few months. She'd wanted to control the narrative completely. She begged me to give her another chance, promised to cut all contact with the other man, suggested couples therapy, even offered to sign some kind of fidelity agreement. The desperation was palpable, but it wasn't desperation to save our relationship. It was desperation to control the damage to her reputation and family relationships. I asked her directly. If her family hadn't seen the evidence, if she still had their unconditional support and sympathy, would she be sitting here begging me to take her back? The question hung in the air for a long moment before she started crying again. That was my answer. I told her I hoped she'd learned something from this experience and that she'd be more honest in her next relationship. I wished her well, genuinely, but told her that what we'd had was over and couldn't be repaired. She asked what she should tell people about why our wedding was canceled. I suggested she tell them the truth, that she'd fallen in love with someone else and had handled the situation poorly. It would be embarrassing, but it was honest. As I got up to leave, she grabbed my hand and asked me one more time to reconsider. She looked genuinely broken, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the screenshots, the calculated planning, the months of lies, and the text message that had ended our relationship like a business transaction. I told her goodbye and walked away. Update 2. The fallout over the next few weeks was more dramatic than I'd anticipated. Her family ended up extending their stay by another week, but not to support her through the breakup. Her parents were dealing with their own crisis of understanding how they'd raised someone capable of such calculated deception. Her sister was particularly affected and actually reached out to me separately to apologize for her sister's behavior and to ask if we could stay in touch as friends. She said I'd been like a brother to her, and she didn't want to lose that relationship because of her sister's choices. Her mother called me a few days after our coffee shop meeting. She wanted to apologize on behalf of the family and to tell me that I'd always be welcome in their home, regardless of what happened with her daughter. She also mentioned that they'd had several difficult conversations with her about the pattern of behavior the screenshots revealed, and they were encouraging her to seek therapy. The most interesting development came through her sister, who told me that their extended family had started asking questions about why the wedding was suddenly canceled. Instead of taking my advice about telling the truth, my ex had apparently created an elaborate story about me having commitment issues and backing out at the last minute. This backfired spectacularly when her aunt, who'd been helping coordinate some of the wedding logistics, called her parents directly to offer support and ask what they could do to help during this difficult time. Her parents, who now knew the truth, were put in the position of either supporting their daughter's lie or correcting the record. They chose honesty. Word spread through their extended family pretty quickly after that. Her sister told me that several relatives had reached out to express their disappointment in how she'd handled things, and a few had even asked for my contact information to reach out directly. Meanwhile, she'd apparently ended things with her affair partner as well. According to her sister, The man had been less interested in a relationship when it came with the drama and family fallout that she was now dealing with. He'd been excited about the idea of stealing someone's fiancé, but much less enthusiastic about dealing with the actual consequences of that choice. About 3 weeks after our coffee shop meeting, she started reaching out again, first through text, then calls, then showing up at my new apartment. The desperation had evolved into something that looked more like genuine remorse, but I suspected it had more to do with the social consequences she was facing than actual regret about hurting me. She'd apparently quit her job, whether voluntarily or otherwise, I wasn't sure, and was considering moving to a different city to start fresh. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to write her a character reference for job applications, highlighting the positive aspects of our relationship. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd systematically deceived me for months, ended our relationship via text, tried to manipulate her family's perception of the situation, and now wanted me to help rehabilitate her professional reputation. I told her no. She didn't take it well. She accused me of being vindictive, of trying to ruin her life, of taking revenge too far. She said showing her family the screenshots had been cruel and unnecessary, that I could have just ended things quietly without destroying her relationship with her parents and sister. I reminded her that she was the one who'd chosen to involve her family by timing the breakup during their visit and planning to use them for emotional support based on a false narrative. I'd simply given them the information they needed to make informed decisions about what kind of support to offer. Her final text to me was long and angry. She accused me of never really loving her, claimed that someone who truly cared about her wouldn't have exposed her like that, and suggested that my actions proved I was just as manipulative as she was. I didn't respond. Update 3. It's been 6 months since the breakup text that started everything, and I'm in a much better place now. I ended up keeping in touch with her sister, who's become a good friend. She's actually visiting next month for a work conference, and we're planning to hang out. Through her, I've learned that my ex did end up moving across the country for a fresh start. Apparently, the social fallout in her professional and personal circles here was more extensive than anyone had anticipated. Her parents and I exchange messages occasionally. They've told me that she's in therapy now and seems to be working through whatever drove her to make those choices. They've also made it clear that they don't excuse her behavior and that they're still processing their own feelings about discovering this side of their daughter. The most interesting update came last month. Her sister told me that my ex had reached out to her, wanting to pass along a message to me. She'd apparently written a long letter apologizing for everything and acknowledging that I'd actually handled the situation better than she deserved. She admitted that showing her family the truth, while painful, had probably been necessary for her own growth, and that she understood now why I'd done it. The letter also included an acknowledgement that her anger about the exposure had really been anger at herself for creating the situation in the first place. She said she'd spent months in therapy working through her tendency to blame others for the consequences of her own choices. Her sister asked if I wanted to read the full letter, but I told her I didn't need to. I was glad to hear that she was working on herself and taking responsibility, but I didn't need her apology or closure from her to move forward. I've been dating someone new for about 2 months now. She's nothing like my ex, straightforward, honest, sometimes almost bluntly direct in her communication. After months of wondering what was real and what was performance in my previous relationship, the transparency is refreshing. Looking back, I think showing her family the screenshots was the right choice, even though it wasn't motivated by purely noble intentions. I was hurt and angry, and yes, there was definitely an element of wanting her to face consequences for her actions. But ultimately, her family deserved to know the truth about what kind of support they were being asked to provide. The revenge aspect, if that's what it was, wasn't about ruining her life. It was about refusing to let her control the narrative and manipulate people who cared about her into supporting a false version of events. She'd made calculated choices for months. I made one calculated choice in response. Would I do the same thing again? Probably. But I'd like to think I'll never be in a position where I have to make that choice again. I've learned a lot about red flags, about trusting my instincts when something feels off, and about the difference between someone who makes mistakes and someone who makes calculated decisions to deceive. The wedding venue got rebooked for someone else's happy day. The deposits we lost were worth it for the education in human nature that I received. And somewhere across the country, My ex is hopefully learning to be the kind of person who deserves the love and trust she threw away. As for me, I'm doing well. Better than well, actually. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's poor choices define your future. I replied, understood, to that breakup text because I really did understand. I understood exactly who she was and what she was capable of. An understanding that was the first step toward building something better for myself. The secret folder on her laptop revealed her secrets, but it also revealed my own strength in how I chose to handle the truth. That's a lesson worth more than any wedding that never happened. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.